What it is, my 10 Peace and Grease here, and today we're going to be talking about dev stream number 139. Now, I personally would love to do a speed run of this particular dev stream, but there is an absolute truckload of information to dissect here. And, honestly, a lot of the changes, or proposed changes, seem very good, and some seem, well, not so good. And that's how we're really going to break this dev stream down. We're going to start with the good and trickle down into the, well, not so good changes. So let's get started, and DE's first proposed change that we're going to talk about is the changes to health, armor, shields, as well as shield gating. Now, this is a really good change. We've been asking for shield gating for years in Warframe, and it would seem like we're finally going to get it. Now, these proposed changes aren't going to just impact us, they're also going to impact the enemies and the way that they scale. I think this is a very positive change, particularly if you're a player like myself who likes to stay in missions for a long period of time. And changing the way those enemies scale and the curve that they scale on, I think is going to have a really beneficial change to the game, as well as the way that health, shields, and armor are going to work in conjunction with that shield gating. I, for one, am excited, and I think this will bring a little bit more variety to enemy types when we go into a mission, as we've had for the past few years. The other change that DE has talked about was reduction of enemy accuracy. Now, I don't recall the exact update, but there was an update that actually improved enemy accuracy substantially. In fact, it got to a point where enemies turned into, instead of stormtrooper aim, being crackshot marksmen. So the fact that they are turning that down a little bit, I think, is a really good thing, particularly, again, if you tend to stay in missions for a longer period of time. Now, the big news for DevStream 139 is the removal of self-damage. Now, I, for one, am really excited about this because I can tell you whenever I know I'm going into a mission and it's going to be a higher level mission and it's going to be a mission against higher level enemies, the one type of weapon I tend to avoid amongst others is self-damage weapons. And the reason for this is because when you're in a squad and you're trying to go through a high-level mission and you're trying to stay in it for a decent amount of time, explosive weapons, it's not a question of if they're going to down you, but when they're going to down you. So the removal of self-damage is going to open up these weapons like the Lens and the Ogress or the new Brahma, or the Tsar for that matter, so that they are going to be useful in any type of mission. Now, a perfect example of this is myself with the Kuba Ogress. I have actually a really decent little role for the Ogress, and it's a weapon that I tend to avoid on higher level missions when it's important for your squad to stay on their feet. Now, the problem with the Kuba Ogress is I have enough multi-shot on my Riven roll that whenever I fire it, the spread at the end of the muzzle is not a nice tight pattern. I always have wonky shells to the right or left or directly at my feet. So it never fails that this weapon downs me. So the fact that we're removing self-damage and it's going to instead get a stagger or an interrupt changes the game entirely. Now, the sad news here is I do believe this is going to open up some of these explosive weapons to some unfortunate nerfing down the line. Again, this is my assumption. I hope that doesn't happen, but I think once this does go into effect, there are going to be some of these explosive weapons that really tend to shine above all others. Once that happens, I think DE is going to start taking a harder look at some of these explosive weapons down the line, obviously. One of which being the Brahma. The Brahma is a lot of fun to use again, but it's always going to be that question of, well, not if it's going to down me, but when it's going to down me. And that's certainly the case. But overall, I think this is a really good change. But there is an unintended downside to this change. And that is there are going to be certain Warframes, someone like, oh, I don't know, Chroma, our boy Chroma here, is going to have basically a negative impact from this. Now, how so? Well, Chroma, as well as a frame like Harrow, for example, is going to rely on taking enemy damage to really ratchet up the buffs on their abilities. Well, once you remove self-damage, you are now fully relying on the damage to come from the enemies. Now, this could take time. You're going to have to change the way that you are going to time certain abilities on some of these Warframes. Now, again, ultimately, I think this is a really positive change overall. But I've said this many times, and I still would like to see some way for us to pull our resources out of certain pieces of equipment. If you remember, the melee changes basically killed the Zenistar. Well, the unfortunate bit about that was that while I think the melee changes overall were decent, unfortunately the Zenistar was the main suffering piece of equipment in that change, because the Zenistar ultimately is now more than anything really kind of useless compared to what it was prior. Well, the downside to that is I've got a lens, I've got Forma, I've got a catalyst in my Zenistar, the time to level it, and now it's a piece of equipment that has now become defunct. Do I think Chroma will become defunct? No, I just think that the combat style for Chroma is going to have to change. But this may be enough for some players to consider Chroma defunct. Well, this is unfortunate if they have Forma, Umbral Forma, Aura Forma, reactors, and time into leveling this particular frame, as well as lenses, and they're just going to basically lose those resources. And it's not as if the resources are gone, they're still there, but they're on a debunked piece of equipment. Perfect example is, again, being the Zenistar. I no longer use my Zenistar when I go into defense missions or I go into survival missions, because it's just too much of a hassle to have to constantly recast the disc over and over and over and over and over again. And it's just more annoying than it is beneficial, in my opinion. So it's not something I use any longer. Again, it would be really nice if we had the option to actually pull some of these resources out of this equipment that's going to be impacted, so we still have it to use on other pieces of equipment. And like I said, I don't think this is going to ruin or rip Chroma, but it's certainly going to have an impact for some players enough that they may not use him as much as he did. And this is, again, one of those changes that I wish that DE would implement, where you have a window when a change goes into effect that's going to impact a piece of equipment or pieces of equipment. We're able to roll those back so that we can actually reacquire those resources and get something from our time investment to a piece of equipment that is likely going to be defunct in the case of the Zenistar. All right, so with that being said, let's move on to the next topic. I'm going to be done ranting about that, but the next big bit of news or change coming is excavator health is now going to scale. Now, this is a really good change, because this is something that the community has been asking for a long time, and I, for one, hope this is going to be the first step in a line of many that is all about improving the health by scaling with these certain types of defense targets, whether we're talking about a cryopod or a mobile defense or a rescue target or excavators, and more especially the Kuba health support pods, life support pods. I really hope that this will have an impact on that as well. Again, really positive change. Back in the day, excavation missions were the bee's knees when it came to farming certain things, and in my opinion still are a really good way to farm certain things. So the fact that the excavator health is going to scale, fan-freaking-tastic, and I just hope that it applies to other types of defense targets. At least we can hope, fingers crossed, that that's what happens. Another positive change is that DE did say that they are going to now make enemy grenades visible. From a distance they will have an icon, but when they're next to you, you'll actually be able to see them on the ground. Fantastic freaking change, because nothing was more annoying than hearing the grenade and not having any clue of a direction to run away from it, and just having to absorb that damage. So another fantastic freaking change. And on top of that, yet another fantastic change is there will now be no mod conflict, and that is fan-freaking-tastic. Thank you, DE, for this one. This one was particularly annoying because whenever you go into a mission, you complete the mission, your squad queues up another mission, and you go running back to your arsenal. You change up your weapon, for example, and you get ready to go and leave the arsenal, and then mod conflict between your sentinel weapon and your primary weapon, or your secondary weapon, or your melee weapon. It was extremely annoying, and it just didn't make sense ultimately, because you owned all these pieces of equipment, you built all these pieces of equipment, you farmed all these mods, you leveled all these mods, and your arsenal literally could not resolve this on its own. It literally would force you to have to go in to your build and switch out this Hell's Chambers for this other Hell's Chamber, as an example, just so you can finally leave the arsenal and you can accept the next mission. It was annoying and it didn't make sense, and now they're going to be removing that, which is, again, fan-friggin-tastic. Kudos to DE. Now, I know somebody's going to say it, so let me clear the air right now. Somebody's going to mention that a lot of these changes that I just discussed are very minor. And I agree with you. Yes, there are bigger fish to fry in regards to problems in Warframe. I agree 100%. No argument here. None whatsoever. However, I think that as far as the playability of the game, these minor tweaks are going to have a really big impact, at least in my opinion. I'm freaking stoked to hear them. They're changes that definitely needed to be made, and I am super happy about hearing these changes. I really am. Oh, before I forget, they also did talk about some tweaks to Bobbin's rework. They're going to actually increase his armor to try to give him some type of resilience, which is freaking fantastic that DE recognizes that's an issue and it needs to be rectified. However, the bigger issue here is that Train Boy is not exactly a tank frame. So the proposed amount of armor isn't really going to have an impact, at least a positive impact, to Bobbin's resilience at all. So I really hope that DE changes their stance on the amount and actually gives Bobbin more armor than they're currently proposing, because that's what it's going to have to be to actually have an impact on Bobbin's resilience. Otherwise, that's going to force everybody, all the players out there in the community, to throw every damn armor mod in the game onto Bobbin, which is basically you're not going to be able to have a build. So while I'm appreciative of DE for making this change, the change needs to make sense, and right now it just really doesn't, unless the armor is a pretty significant increase. Oh, and the other thing is they did talk about Titania changes again, and again, it's not a frame I typically use. I think most of the proposed changes for Titania are very good. I will actually be using her once these changes go into effect, because again, I think they're positive. Does this hashtag confirm that Titania is the next prime? In my opinion, yeah, I still think so. I still think Titania is going to be the next prime, but who knows? DE could pull a rabbit out of their hat and go, oh look, here's Titania prime and Nezha prime, since Nezha should be the next prime after Titania. Either way, that's fine with me. Again, I'm excited to get either one of them. More so Nezha, if I'm honest, but who knows? Titania could come out swinging. I mean, she really could. Okay, so with all those things being said, let's move into the not-so-good changes, shall we? Okay, so we're going to be getting a new event probably within the next week or two, and it's going to be very Railjack-centric. Now, this is really going to be kind of the first Railjack event, so I'm interested to see how it's going to go. And as a side note, if you're missing any arcanes or looking for any specific arcanes, this event should be the one that you focus on, because allegedly Little Duck, who this event is going to surround, is going to have every arcane in the game. Allegedly. Now, I don't know how far that's going to extend, if it's going to extend to the factions arcanes or if it's just going to be in-game arcanes. I don't know until the event drops, but that event is just around the corner. Now, if you haven't built your Railjack, DE has also announced that they are going to reduce the overall construction cost. Now, this should have been in the good section, but there's something else I want to talk about here in a moment, and that's why it's down here in the not so good section. But staying on task as far as the build cost for your Railjack, this is a really good change. Basically, the build cost is going from like 6 million credits down to 600,000 credits, which is a huge reduction. If you've already built your Railjack, like myself, don't fret. You'll be getting the difference back in your resources, as well as you'll be getting a couple of rush repair drones. If you're already in the process of building your railjack, you again will be refunded that difference, and you will, from at least from what they're saying in the dev stream, you will at least get one rush repair drone. If you haven't built your railjack yet, well, then obviously you can wait for the changes to go into effect and then build your railjack for the much reduced cost. Now, if you want my 2 cents on it, I would say at least start building your railjack now. You'll get the difference refunded, on top of which you should be able to at least get a one rush repair drone out of it. If you wanted my 2 cents, that's what I would do. If I was in a position where I didn't have my railjack built as yet, that's precisely what I would do. I would start building it right now, this second, so that I could get at least a rush repair drone out of it. But that's my 2 cents. You do you. So where is the negative in this discussion of railjack? The negative is I'm still not hearing any massive changes to variety or depth when it comes to railjack. That's really my biggest issue and concern for railjack. It has always been that. While railjack, as I've said many times, has a honeymoon type of effect, meaning that it's very fun and very interesting when you first start it, it wears thin very, very quickly because of the lack of variety and depth. I still don't hear any improvement in this sector. Now, credit where credit is due, DE has been working hard on refining and repairing railjack, and I think that they've done a commendable job. But there's just not enough significant changes to railjack to get me back in it just yet. Now, with that said, once this event drops, yes, I will be sticking my toe in there to kind of see what this event is about, whether it's just a grind fest, which arcanes this event is going to have, and kind of figure out exactly what they're going for. Now, with those things being said, even though there's no significant changes to railjack being announced, the big thing here is maybe there will be. Maybe DE is currently working on those changes and just is keeping it under wraps for the time being. And that's very possible, but it's, at least in my opinion, those types of significant changes can't come soon enough. My biggest concern is that this event is going to drop and it is going to be all about the kill X amount of fighters, kill X amount of cruise ships. And I'm just not about that, right? That's kind of why I quit playing railjack ages ago, because I got tired of that. And so I hope that's not the case with this event, but I suspect that it's going to be. Another change that doesn't appear to be not so good is the changes to arcanes. Okay. So previously with arcanes, you were in a position where if you, depending on the arcane obviously, if you had some arcanes, you would be able to actually stack them. Put the same arcane, max arcane, above and below on a piece of equipment, for example, and you could reap those benefits. Well, arcanes will no longer stack. Another thing is that arcanes buffs could potentially be kept indefinitely in a mission if you were getting headshots or if you were taking damage in the sort. Now they are going to be adding a cooldown to these arcanes. Yeah, this doesn't seem like a good deal, but this isn't the first time arcanes have been changed. It's not going to be the last time arcanes have been changed. I personally would like to at least see the changes in the flesh before I really develop an opinion about it. Yeah, the changes don't seem very good, but yeah, before I just completely poo-poo all over it, I'm going to want to actually see it in-game before I do so. Yeah, just my 2 cents on that topic. The bad news here, and it is in some ways bad news, is they're changing the way status effects work. Now, I know on the surface you're thinking, well, that sounds like good news. Well, hear me out first. So, crit chance can go over 100%, but status chance has never been able to go over 100% until now. DE wants to change up the way status chance works so it actually works similar to crit. And you'll be able to actually multi-proc elementals. So, let's say you have a Riven mod on a weapon and that gives you 200% status chance. Well, at that rate, you'll be able to proc 2 different elemental status effects. So, for example, heat and corrosive. You can proc them at the same time with 200% status effect. They're also going to buff a lot of the mods, substantially in some cases, that apply status effect to weapons. And this doesn't just go for primaries or secondaries or melee, it goes for all of them. All status chance mods are going to be getting a buff. Now, with all of these things being said, the biggest questions I have is, are they going to apply some kind of status multiplier? Are we going to have to be really concerned about overstripping, as an example? And what kind of impact is this going to have on weapons that are at a low status effect? Because there are many weapons out there that have a very low status effect. Does that mean that now every weapon is potentially a hybrid weapon? And what does that mean for weapons that are already a really good hybrid weapon prior to these changes? Does that mean that they're just going to become super OP? So the meta is going to become the pre-chain update hybrid weapons so that they can really take advantage of that. I don't know yet. You know, these changes are kind of up in the air still. A lot of questions surrounding them. Unfortunately, the biggest downside that I can see from this change is those shotguns that have 100% status chance, and they have and in case you're wondering what type of shotguns I'm referring to, we're talking about shotguns like the Tigris Prime. The Tigris Prime has always kind of been the OG OP in the game. I love the Tigris Prime. I always keep my Tigris Prime on me when I go into high-level missions. When I know I'm going into high-level missions, I have two different builds. One set up for Corpus, one set up for Grineer, and that's kind of how I go at it and attack it. Unfortunately, the Tigris Prime uses a pellet type of projectile, meaning that when you pull the trigger, you get multiple little pellets. Now, in comparison, the Astilla, as an example, fires a slug, a glass slug. So it's one projectile that comes out of the muzzle. So the way that status effect is procced on these two shotguns, while they're both shotguns, are different. So the issue here is with status chance increasing exponentially, just like crit. That is really going to hurt these types of shotguns that fire pellets. Yeah. Now listen, I'll be the first one to admit it, that weapons like the Tigris Prime, they're strong. They're very strong. All right, I'm not gonna sit here and try to baffle you with BS. I'm not gonna do that. They are. It's strong. There's a reason why it kind of permanently sticks to my wall in my arsenal, and whenever I know I'm going into high-level missions or I'm going to stay for a very, very long time in a mission, I immediately reach for that Tigris Prime. Every time. No question about it. Because I know the Tigris Prime will always get the job done with all that slash, and in the case of Grineer, heat and corrosive, or maybe viral, for example, I know that that's going to do the job and have no problem doing it. Right? Same thing goes for Infested in this case. I will use this Infested Grineer build for that. And it does a fantastic job. There's not really much that can stand in its way. Unfortunately, it would seem like DE is really trying to stick this thing in the vault and make it disappear forever and ever. It almost seems like shotguns that are pellet-based projectiles are going to have a ribbon mod to be somewhat good anymore, which is sad. It bums me out. But this goes back to what I was saying about pieces of equipment where changes impact them negatively and they become defunct. This is why I've said it before and I'm going to say it again. This is why we need some sort of refund policy for our resources and our time here. I have a Catalyst in my Tigris. I've got Forma in my Tigris. I've got time leveling it. I've got a ribbon mod that I've sunk Kuva into, rolling it. But I'm going to lose all that, just poof, as soon as these changes go into effect. It just sucks that over and over and over again, this isn't the first time either, as you heard me mention before, my Zenistar is dead to me. But I have got all the typical types of resources into it that you can think of. But yet, the Zenistar is a weapon I no longer use. And it just feels bad when you have a piece of equipment, you build that piece of equipment, and a change negatively impacts it to the point that it becomes defunct. And that's exactly what's going to happen with shotguns like the Tigris Prime, sadly. All of those resources that we have in it are now wasted. All of the time that we have in it are now wasted. Why is there no rollback or refund policy that allows us to withdraw those resources, some type of reimbursement for the time we invest in these? Now listen, I'm not going to sit here and browbeat you about it, but I will say that when you look at certain things, you're going to notice that most of my weapons have forma. Most of my weapons have the time invested in them. Just the Kuba weapons here. That's 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35. That's 40 forma right there. And just these bottom 8 weapons. 40 forma right there. That's not even talking about everything above that. But you'll notice as I scroll through here, most of my equipment has forma in it. Any change that impacts these weapons, I'm losing. I'm losing all of that time. I'm losing all of those resources, and it's just not fair. Ultimately, it's just not fair. It makes you, if you're in a situation like most of your experienced players, your veteran players, or even intermediate players, where you really perfect a build and you really invest the time and you go to the extent of getting a ribbon mod, and if you didn't earn it, you have to buy it, which means you're losing plat, you're losing money, and then Kuva on top of it to roll it, and then all of this stuff just over and over again, and you get to the point where you just don't feel like it's wise to sink any resources in any piece of equipment, be it weapon or frame or anything. That's why we need a refund policy. Again. Anyway, just my thoughts and opinions on this. Again, sorry about the little bit of the rant about refund, but I think it needs to be said, and it needs to be said over and over again until these changes at least provide players the option to withdraw their resources and get reimbursed for their time in this matter. But anyway, let me know what you think about in the comment section about any or all of these proposed changes in DevStream 139. And until next time, peace and grease.